Well, good morning, church. I'll give you that. That was pretty good. My name is Morgan. I'm the student ministries pastor, and it's a joy to be sharing from the Word with you this weekend. This summer, we're exploring the core beliefs of the Christian and Missionary Alliance, the denomination of which we are a part. And we wanted to dedicate a weekend of this series to how we hear God's voice, because one of our core beliefs is that God speaks. If you were to pick up a Bible with no foreknowledge of its content, one of the first things that you would learn about the God of Judeo-Christian faith is that He is the God who speaks. The book of Genesis opens with this. When God began to create the heavens and the earth was complete chaos, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God spoke the universe into existence, and we learn that when God speaks, it is so. But we soon discover that not only does God speak things into creation, He also speaks to the created. In Genesis 3, we find God taking an evening stroll through the Garden of Eden. And when He doesn't see the man and the woman whom He created, He calls out to them and says, "Where are you?" Upon hearing His question, the man and the woman come out of hiding and begin to dialogue with their Creator about what's just happened in this paradise now lost. What strikes me about their encounter is that the all-knowing God asks a question as though the answer is hidden from Him. He knows exactly where they are and what they've done. There's no playing hide and seek with the omniscient God. And yet God initiates a conversation. He cares to converse with them. He cares what they have to say. And even when He drives them out of the garden, away from the tree of life, He continues to speak. He speaks with Hagar in the wilderness, Jacob in a dream, Moses in a burning bush, Deborah at war, Samuel in the temple, Huldah in the second quarter, Esther in a palace, Isaiah in a vision. In the Gospels, Jesus, God incarnate, speaks with His disciples, the religious leaders, and all who are willing to hear. And in the book of Acts, God gives His Spirit that all people might hear and declare the word of God. The scriptures are clear. Our God is the God who speaks to women and to men, to the elderly and to children, to the slave and to the master, to the citizen and to the foreigner, to the rich and to the poor. His communication is not limited to a particular time, place, or people. Our God shows up in the magnificent and the mess. He shows up when, like Hagar, we're lost and have no sense of direction, no place to go. He shows up when, like Deborah, we're staring into the face of the impossible. He shows up when, like Samuel, we're serving in the church. And He shows up when, like Esther, we're navigating the public square. And yet, one of the realities with which we must contend is when God doesn't seem to show up. When God is silent. When we cry out to Him and yet feel so very alone. When the questions of the psalmists become our own. Why, O Lord, do you stand far off? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? How long, O Lord? Will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I bear pain in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all day long? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me from the words of my groaning? We can be quick to read these questions as poetry, mere metaphor. And yet, like the modern music artists, these writers dug deep into their souls. Their words resonate because they capture the human experience. Their lyrics are not simply works of poetic genius, but lifelines. And it's through them that we discover that not only does God speak, but at times He is silent. And it's here that I want us to slow down. Because we can be quick to assume that if we seek him with our whole heart, if we have enough faith, God will speak. And yet we know that this isn't always true. Sometimes, like the psalmist, we seek God but hear only the echo of our own voice. And so this weekend, I want to touch on not only how to hear God's voice, but how to understand when we don't. When preachers are asked to teach on hearing God's voice, they typically turn to John 10. And I'm going to do the same because not only does John 10 teach us how to hear God's voice, it grounds our experience of his silence. John 10 follows the story of a miracle. Jesus has just healed a man born blind, and the Pharisees, they have questions. Why? Because Jesus healed on the Sabbath, and according to their interpretation of the law, no work is to be done on the Sabbath, not even the healing work of God. And so they debate whether Jesus is a sinner or a saint, because surely a man from God would observe the Sabbath, and yet this so-called sinner performed a divine miracle. After some time, the Pharisees drive away the now seeing man, and it's at this point that Jesus joins the conversation. Speaking with the seeing man, Jesus reveals himself to be the Son of Man and states his purpose. He says, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind." In other words, you were blind, but now you see. And the Pharisees, who believe they see, are blind. For you have seen and you believe, but they have seen and they have closed their eyes. He then says, "Very truly I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of strangers." He continues, "I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know my Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd." Jesus, the good shepherd, calls his sheep by name, and they follow because they know his voice. Not only do they hear his voice, they know it. At its very heart, hearing God is grounded in relationship, a relationship initiated by Jesus, who reveals himself to those formerly blind. And I love this image of Jesus as Good Shepherd because it depicts the kind of relationship that he intends to have with us, one characterized by care and intimacy. This week, our city hosted the Calgary Stampede, the world's largest outdoor rodeo featuring the world's toughest competitors. Among the 1.4 million-ish people who attended were 7,500 animals. These animals are not only among the most beautiful farm animals, but among the most well-cared-for farm animals. During Stampede, they receive round-the-clock care. They're examined by vets, fed special diets, allotted time for rest, and if at any point they're injured or feeling uncomfortable, they're sent home. Their health and safety is an organizational priority. It's also a priority of their owners, those who care for them all 52 weeks of the year. Cowboys and cowgirls, ranchers, are animal experts. They are really good at caring for their animals. These are the people who ride through fields, driving stray animals back to their herds. These are the people who regularly examine them for sign of disease or injury. These are the people who check fences, test water, and examine new plants, always on the lookout for anything that might cause harm. Ranchers, like our Good Shepherd, are attentive to their animals. Imagine one sheep goes missing. The rancher has 9 instead of 10. Do you think he shrugs his shoulders and says, "Oh, well, we don't need all 10"? No, they figure out which sheep is missing and go after it. Last fall, I took our students to the Calgary farmyard. At the end of the night, our leader chat started blowing up, which is never a good thing. It started with, "Has anyone seen Jimmy?" Not his real name. And then poured in the, no, apparently he went to go get water. I'll go look for him. Any sign of him, found him. He's getting water. We have everyone. Buses are good to go. Do you think at any point we said, "Nah, we don't need Jimmy. I'm sure he's fine. He can call an Uber"? No, I mean, 1, I'd like to keep my job. And 2, we actually care about Jimmy. Sure, Jimmy was 1 of 92. And if we came back with 91 of 92, that's still a 99% return rate. I hope your kid isn't the 1%. In fact, if we'd left Jimmy behind, we would have got him back to the church on time, which would have been a big win for me. But here's the thing. When it comes to people, 99% is not enough. It's not enough for FAC Student Ministries. It's not enough for the Good Shepherd. You see, in the Good Shepherd's eye, the one who wanders is just as important as the ones who stayed. Sometimes it's easy to believe that when we wander, God will love us less. I mean, he has a number of people who seem to be doing a much better job following him. Surely he'll give less time to us and more time to them. He'll care more for them more than he'll care for us. He'll speak to them more than he'll speak to us. And yet we must remember that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. That's how much he loves us. That's how much he loves you. While you were still a sinner, Christ died for you. And if this morning you feel as though you've wandered too far, you can be sure that the Good Shepherd is not far behind. He knows who he's looking for. He knows where to find you. In the ancient Near East, the shepherd spent the majority of his hours with his sheep. As a result, he was intimately familiar with them. Like humans, sheep are unique. They have different personalities. Some might be shy, others might be bold. And as the shepherd spent time with his sheep, he would become familiar with their distinctive qualities and then name them according to those distinctive qualities. In his flock, there might be a dopey, doc, bashful, sneezy, happy, grumpy, and sleepy. If one of them were to wander off, the shepherd would know which one. He'd also know where to look for them. Sneezy's gone, probably wandered over to the cliff. He likes the flowers that grow there. Sleepy's gone, he's probably sleeping in that cool cave by the river. Dopey's gone, he's probably chasing a butterfly. The shepherd knows his sheep. He knows their tendencies, likes, and dislikes. He knows where to find them when they're stressed. He knows where to find them when they're upset. He knows where to find them when they're angry. In the same way, Jesus, our good shepherd, knows our wanderings. He knows our tendency to gossip when we're jealous. He knows our drive for more at the expense of others. He knows our short temper when things don't go our way. He knows our lies when we can't face the truth. For he has searched us and he knows us. Nothing is hidden from him. In a similar way, the sheep know their shepherd. How? Because they've spent time with the shepherd who cared to spend time with them. They've heard him speak day in and day out and have become intimately familiar with his voice. They know how he speaks. They know the types of things that he might say. They know the tones of his voice. In fact, they're so attuned to his voice that they can pick it out of a crowd. In the evening, shepherds often herded their sheep into large community pens. In the morning, they would return for their sheep, calling them out by name, one by one. As each shepherd called his sheep, the sheep would be listening for their name on the voice of the one who named them. They would be listening for their shepherd. And upon hearing their name, they would get up and follow him, not by force, but willingly. For this was the shepherd whom they knew, the shepherd in whom they put their trust, the shepherd who would lead them to safe pasture, the shepherd who would call them back if they veered off track. I wonder if we sometimes miss hearing God's voice because we don't know his names for us. We hear him called loved, but we don't respond because we expect reject. We hear him called child, but we don't respond because we expect unlovable. We hear him called masterpiece, but we don't respond because we expect mistake. We hear him called saint, but we don't respond because we expect sinner. We hear him called chosen, but we don't respond because we expect not good enough. Or perhaps we don't hear God because we've confused his voice with that of another shepherd, a shepherd who promises fullness of life apart from Jesus. The shepherd of fame drives us to attain influence, followers, and likes. The shepherd of fortune drives us to strive for more money, more stuff. The shepherd of egocentrism drives us to seek control. I can be my own shepherd. We can be quick to name ourselves according to our own perceptions, the comments of others, and cultural messaging. And yet God, our good shepherd, names us according to what he sees in us, people who are fearfully and wonderfully made. We can be quick to follow other shepherds who offer us a pretty package, and yet Jesus is clear. Fullness of life is found in him alone. Over the past few weeks, the unresponsive sheep is something I've spent a lot of time thinking about. Because when a shepherd calls his sheep and it doesn't come running, it signals that something's wrong. Maybe they've wandered off. Maybe they're listening for the wrong name. Maybe they're following the wrong shepherd. Or maybe they're hurt. This year, I've found it hard to hear God's voice. On many occasions, he has seemed particularly quiet. Last year, my dad was diagnosed with cancer. 8 months later, he was declared in remission. 4 days later, my now fiance, Matt, was diagnosed with cancer. For months, I've felt as though I've been living in a daze. Matt's diagnosis felt like deja vu, like I was reliving a nightmare. During Matt's treatment, I found it especially difficult to read my Bible, listen to worship music, and engage in church. Because every time I opened my Bible or tried to sing, I cried. During my dad's treatment, the scriptures and music felt like a bomb. This time they stung. I had questions for God. I felt disappointed by him. I was afraid. I deeply resonated with the father of the demon-possessed boy who cried out to Jesus, "I believe, help my unbelief." Perhaps hardest of all, I found it difficult to pray. Over the course of Matt's treatment, I heard others pray for him with sincerity and great faith. My prayers, whatever I could muster up, were like limp vegetables. I just didn't know what to say. How do you pray when your 23-year-old boyfriend receives a cancer diagnosis? When you went from dreaming together about marriage to wondering if he would still be sitting across from you next Christmas? And I struggled with that. I felt ashamed that in Matt's moment of greatest need, I couldn't bring myself to pray. I felt upset that God seemed to be speaking to everyone but me. And I wondered if perhaps it was because he was disappointed with me, that he was disappointed in my seeming lack of faith. And yet, as I reflected on the Good Shepherd narrative, I began to wonder if there's more to God's silence than disappointment. In his book, A Grace Disguised, Jerry Sitzer comments on the experience of pain. He says, "Pain seems to conceal God from us, making it hard for us to believe there could be a God in the midst of our suffering. In other words, Pain closes our ears and narrows our vision. It can stand in the way of hearing God and seeing him at work in the world around us. The image that's helped me to understand this truth is actually from Matt's cancer journey. The type of cancer with which Matt was diagnosed is a type that can infiltrate your central nervous system. For this reason, over the course of his treatment, he had to receive lumbar punctures to check his spinal fluid and inject chemo into his spine. I won't go into more detail, but his first procedure was a nightmare. For nearly an hour, Matt and I sat on opposite sides of a hospital table. He was leaned over it for support. I was in charge of keeping him still. With my hands in his and my face buried into his ear, I could hear every sharp intake of breath as his hands tightened around mine. And as the seconds ticked by, I talked to him. He's here today. He's in remission. There's no sign of cancer in his body. And if you ask him what I said during that hour, he'll say, I don't know. Not because he was ignoring me. Matt's the kind of person who will hang on to every word you say. But because he was in so much pain that his sole focus was to stay conscious. And yet, while unable to register what I was saying, Matt knew that I was there. I wonder if, like Matt, the reason I struggled to hear God's voice was because I was in pain. Day after day, I was just trying to make it through without crumbling. I knew that God was present with me, and I did catch sight of him throughout our journey. I saw him in the sunrise on Matt's first day of chemo. I felt him in the arms of a youth leader who held me as I wept. I heard him in the voice of friends who asked, "What do you need? How can I help?" And I trust that the God who is infinitely more present than me was right there, holding me close and whispering into my ear, even though my pain made it hard to hear. I know that my experience is not unique. Some of you in this room or online have experienced significant pain and have felt as though God has turned his back on you. And if that's your experience, I want you to hear that you're not alone in that experience. As I sat across from Matt, whispering into his ear, Psalm 23 came to mind. The problem was I was missing a line. As I grasped for it in my mind, I silently pleaded, "Lord, help me to remember." And that's when I heard, "For you are with me. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." In a makeshift hospital room at Foothills Hospital, I was reminded that God was with me. And just as he was with me, he is with you. When you walk through dark valleys, circumstances that are so complex and painful, you are not alone. The Good Shepherd is there, calling your name, leading you on. You might have trouble seeing him, you might have trouble hearing him, but he is present, and he is present from a place of understanding. During his earthly ministry, Jesus, fully God and fully man, experienced the breadth of the human experience. He knew rejection not just by strangers, but by friends. He knew the reality of hearing a poor diagnosis, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." He knew the grief of losing a loved one. "Lord, if you had been there, my brother, your friend, would not have died." And at the climax of his life, on the Friday we call good, he hung upon a cross, and in his pain he cried out, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani?" My God, why have you forsaken me?" Jesus endured incredible pain, and in that pain he cried out to the Father and didn't receive an answer. Jesus, who said, "What I speak, therefore, I speak just as the Father has told me," could not hear the Father's voice. On the cross, he knew the silence of God. Sitzer, who himself experienced terrible tragedy in his life, reflects on the suffering God. He says, "I have found comfort knowing that the sovereign God, who is in control of everything, is the same God who has experienced the pain I live with every day. No matter how deep the pit into which I descend, I keep finding God there. He is not aloof from my suffering, but draws near to me when I suffer. He is vulnerable to pain, quick to shed tears, and acquainted with grief. God is a suffering sovereign who feels the sorrow of the world." In other words, he knows. He sees you as you cry yourself to sleep the third time this week. He sees you sitting in the car trying to muster up the courage to get out. He sees you at your desk fighting to hold yourself together. He knows the disappointment you feel when a friend walks away. He knows the ache in your heart every time you leave the hospital without the one you love. He knows the crushing weight of sorrow that leaves you feeling like you can hardly breathe. He hears your anguished screams. He hears your desperate pleas. He hears your whispered questions, the ones you don't know if you want him to answer. And he draws near. Where do you find yourself this week? Perhaps you find yourself more and more attuned to the voice of God. You're hearing him speak with regularity and clarity. If that's true of you, would you press in, not just for yourself, but for the ones who can't hear? Would you be our ears when we can't hear, repeating God's words of kindness, love, and encouragement over us? Would you be our voices when we can't speak, interceding for us when our words fall short? And if you're experiencing silence, I pray that you would know the kindness of our Good Shepherd. For when you are weary, when you have nothing to give, he still draws near. He's not afraid of your pain. He's not angry when you can't hear. He's not disappointed when you can't pray. And this truth remains. No matter where you are, be it the darkest valley or the brightest hilltop, God is with you. He is the one who draws near. He is our Good Shepherd.